Okay, we are back with another great episode of Meeting of the Minds. Today, baseball mindset, the legendary Paul Niggebrugge. We're excited to have you, legendary baseball coach. We talk a lot about mindset off the camera, right? About what our program does, what you've done with your athletes, what you've seen with your players. What are some of the biggest, I guess we could start from, we usually talk about how mental the sport is versus how much we're training mentally and physically. So we say, like baseball be between 50 and 90% mental, yet we're training 90% physical. Is that something you see with your players? Something you've seen?
First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your listeners and always enjoy our conversations. So to address the mental portion of performance, I think it's critical. We talk about courage, we talk about concentration, and I like to add curiosity. I mean, those three things I think are critical to performance and critical to being a human being, a person first. And if we don't address those things, then I think we fall far short. And I find that most programs don't spend enough time on it. I think it's critical. I don't think anybody would argue that. And so do we have a process in place? Do we practice it? Do the players understand it? And I would say that most of the time when I ask that question of players, parents, and coaches, they look at me like I've got three heads. And so they realize it's important, but yet the effort they spend on developing those skills and traits and attributes are almost 0 to 20%. Just like you included in your book.
That's right.
Well, first of all, I want you to know that this book, I love it. There are so many things in here that resonate that we use. And so I'm sure we'll get into some subject matters that's within the book to include what you opened up with.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, because a lot of times ball players don't spend time on their mental game, how does that cost them concretely on the field? How does that hurt them on the field?
Great question. Well, for me, it's like a bird or scissors. A bird can't fly, assuming that one wing is the mental side and the other wing is the physical side. You can't have one. You got to have both to fly. Same thing with cutting scissors. Same analogy, metaphor, whatever. What consequences are? I think that players unravel and they lose it. They get into a red light state of mind, and they don't perform. They can't execute after a critical error. So in baseball, it's a game of a lot of downtime and a lot of time to think about all the things you could have done and should have done. And so if you don't have a good grasp of keeping your composure and the mental side and things of that nature, then you're not going to optimize your performance and you're not going to be able to compete at a high level. So I think it's hugely important, and there's great bad results if you don't practice the mental side.
You see a lot of players do better pre-game or in practice than in an actual game. You see that a lot?
I do. I would go a little bit back further and reverse engineer a little bit. You see kids do really well in batting cages, in practices, but when the lights shine on you and you have a big stage, all of a sudden things don't materialize. And I feel strongly about this, Gene. I think one strong indicator or predictor of success is having a demanding and yet nurturing practice or training. And if we don't train and demand things from our athletes, then we can't expect them to perform when the pressure is greater. And so you have to be uncomfortable. You have to struggle to find success, I believe.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I really loved about what you said you do with your teams in terms of making sure that you're incorporating mental training into practice, putting them in scenarios that they're going to be in, and just getting them to be able to deal with different obstacles. Can you talk a little bit about that? That's huge.
Yeah, I think a lot of people compartmentalize too much. And we have a mental interweaving into all that we do. When we practice, we include the mental side, whether it's a station in our circuit of breathing, or whether it's a station of visualization, imagination, and learning how to overcome fear, or it's heightening awareness. And so practice has to include that, and it has to include not being successful. I think in practice, too often, we as coaches make them look good. That's not our job. We can make everybody look like a superstar. I mean, I can throw pitches right down the middle with no velocity. Anyone can do that. And so it's making them feel good. And there may be a time and place to do that. But generally speaking, we've got to make it much more demanding. So they understand that there's constraints in a game. There's pressure, self-perceived many times, but maybe we're only going to let you take 1 or 2 swings, or at the most 5 to 6, to stimulate the game, because you should play as you practice and practice as you play, as you stated in your book.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was going to say, that's one of the big things we say: practice the way you play the way you're going to practice. So if we were going to put some shoe leather on that in baseball, like you already did, by saying you're only throwing them 5 or 6 pitches or 7 pitches as opposed to just continuous, what are some other things that you would do, that you would recommend other coaches do that would be very helpful in incorporating that?
Well, I've got some pretty strong opinions about that. So I think to have a demanding practice and to stimulate a real game situation, I believe that you've got to incorporate decision-making in your drill work. So when you're hitting, you're not just hitting a pitch that's right down the middle. You may throw a curveball. You may throw off-speed pitch. You may throw a ball. You may throw a strike. The game, the practices are so predictable, yet when we compete, the game is unpredictable. So there's a big disconnect there. So I think decision-making, I think trying to make someone uncomfortable, you've got to keep in mind the frequency and how often it occurs in a game in terms of how you set up your practice. And so pressure, decision-making, making it as game-like as possible is really, really important. And then, of course, the timing. When we talk about hitting and fielding, and I look at them at the same thing, because quite frankly, intent and intensity is not enough, in my opinion. You may want to do really well and have a lot of desire, and you may practice with great intensity, but the missing piece for me is timing. And so let's say hitting, or let's say fielding. You're locked in, but if your timing is off, I don't care how bad you want it, it's just not going to come to you. So you've got to be aware of that and understand that. And so we have to practice timing. Again, right. Whether we're hitting ground balls to our infielders or whether we're throwing batting practice to our hitters. There's different ground balls you should be hitting your infielders. You shouldn't just keep, as you often do, and I'm guilty of it too, but I try to keep evolving. And one of the things that I've really learned and really understood and seen significant difference is that most programs, you have coaches hitting one at a time fungo with the same type of ground ball. Well, how is that really preparing an infielder properly for the demands of a game that they're going to see? The corner guys are going to see a lot of rollover, top spin, and occasionally hard hit balls. The middle infielders are going to have balls to different sides. They're going to have slow roller. They're going to have all sorts of balls. You got to realize too that the middle infielders, the shortstop in particular, will probably get the greatest exit speed off the bat. Right. Surprisingly enough, where the corner guys don't. And that's because on average, over a course of a game, oftentimes when you pull the ball or you're late, depending on first or third or righty or lefty hitter, right, you get a lot of missed hits. But right, when you hit it to the shortstop, it's usually more often hit well. And so as a fungo hitter, hitting top spin, hitting soft ground balls, making the fielders aware that we've got a fast runner, we've got a slow runner, we got an average runner. That determines my approach. And so all of these things, the situations, the number of outs, the type of ground balls, all of those things you've got to include in training from a fielding standpoint.
So you'll call out a different situation That's what you're calling out different situations and changing it up each time? Or?
Well, yes, because I do believe in randomness as well, but we have a situation where we cover everything with 4 scenarios. We have first and thirds, we have second and thirds, we have nobody on, and we have different outs and scenarios, and I hit the ball. So they've got to determine the pace of the ball, how they respond, and how they react. So we're at a double play depth, we're infield in, infield, corners in, and then regular. And then we place the guys at certain bases in a sequence, and we say, let's say there's no outs or 1 out, or always 1 out. And so depending on the type of hitter and the type of situation, the infielders have to respond at that moment. So it's not one of where they just hit ground balls, turn 2. No, depending on the pace of the ball, depending on the runner, depending on the situation and conditions of the field, is what you have to determine to make the proper play. And so that's happening instinctively after we train this. So when it happens in a game, it's an automatic response versus, being surprised by a ball that's sharply hit and not really knowing what to do with it, or not knowing the type of runner from a fielding standpoint.
Right. And now I hear a lot of people say that, pitchers are some of the biggest head cases. How does the pitcher prepare to practice the way he plays and plays the way he practices? How do you work that into practice for them?
It's another good question. Well, it starts in practice, right? So when you do your bullpen work, you make it as game-like as you can. And so you pitch from both the stretch and the windup. You pitch maybe 15 to 25 pitches per sequence. Then you take a little break, just like you would in a game. You throw an assortment of different pitches. You have a hitter standby. You have a catcher, certainly, and you have your pitching partner to record your command, where you're throwing the pitches, what type of throwing strikes. Maybe you're recording velocity if you have a radar gun. And then you flip-flop. When you work on your PFPs, the defensive situations that the pitcher gets in, I really don't like, and you see it all the time, where pitchers cover first or how they field bunts. I think that should be done as live as possible. That includes a runner. Just like fielding for regular infielders, you can have a stopwatch, or you could have a horn sound after 4 seconds or whatever time you think they need to get it over there. But let's say the average time in the big leagues or high school is anywhere between 4.2, 4.4. Yeah. So I like to cheat a little bit and go maybe 4.1. You've got to get rid of it by 4.1 or 4.0. Right. And that's assuming that you got a little faster runner than the average, or you can put it 3.9. So so from a fielding standpoint, but from a pitching standpoint, I'd like to go live. There's nothing better than live. And maybe bringing in at the end of a practice and saying, okay, stud Bubba, here we go. Bottom of the 7th, bottom of the 9th. You got to hold the lead. There's a runner on third. And just create all these different scenarios where it's your job to compete against this hitter at this moment in time. You have a pitchers, catchers versus base runners drill. Pitcher, catcher versus base runners drill. So we have a situation where we have runners at the corner or maybe just at first base, and they have to steal the base. And it's the catcher's responsibility to throw them out. So it's live, where the runner has to slide and all those good things. And so the more you can make it as much as similar to the game as possible, then they're not going to be shocked or surprised when they perform at a high level or on a big stage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how about from a mental perspective, I think about during the game, how do you keep the athletes level where you want them to be? So they're, how should they be? And then also thinking about what should they be focusing on when they're in the dugout while the team's hitting? Because I know a lot of times we see that if athletes are too wrapped up in what's going on in the moment, right, a lot of times they start feeling all those jitters themselves. So what's like that healthy balance for how they should be mentally recovering? They're a good teammate, but they're not getting too wrapped up in like what's going on, where then they're going to be affected when they come up to bat.
Okay. So
I know it's a lot I asked there.
No, see, I've got a problem. I really do. When I start getting off like we're doing now,
it's great.
So many things come in, and it's like a blitz on my mind. And so I got to say, okay, one thing at a time. So I get excited.
I love it.
Yeah, so I get excited. So To keep people focused in the game. I don't think you can concentrate for 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever long your games usually last. I think that's a difficult task and almost impossible, and I don't think we can do that. So I'm not expecting that. What I teach them in our training and our practice is this. As a hitter, you have about 6 minutes to show how great you are, to be productive. So what are you doing with all that downtime, or the remaining time in the game? And so how you handle the downtime in the dugout or away from the immediate play at that moment in time is critical, but we don't spend time on that.
Right.
And so, like my pitchers, after they pitch, I want them to relax. I don't need them to be a cheerleader. I don't need to expend extra energy. Certainly support your players. Watch if you will, but now's the time to rejuvenate, recover, and let's get going next time you get back on the mound, because you never know. It could be a short inning or it could be a long inning. So both you have to have a contingency plan for. But as far as keeping the guys involved and focused, it depends on position, but I have a circle of influence. And once you get into that circle of influence, let's say as a shortstop, you've got to be focused. You've got to be ready at a moment's notice. Now, after the pitcher delivers it and nothing happens, the catcher throws it back, now's the time you can go outside of that circle of influence. You may relax. You may pick up some dirt. Do whatever it takes for you to get back engaged into that circle of influence where you got to make things happen. So I just think that we need to spend more time and make the kids aware that the downtime is really the critical time, because, the game actually happens in milliseconds when you have to perform, and that everybody does. But it's the downtime that can really determine, I think, winners and wannabe winners, being aware of that.
I think that energy management is absolutely huge. And like you said, a lot of people don't spend time on that, just sometimes the skills, and you miss a big part of maximizing their success, right? Anytime you're using a lot of energy, there's a peak, then there's got to be a valley. You can't maintain it the whole time. You're not supposed to. So I think of that. I also think about routines, like putting your mind at ease while having like a pre-pitch routine, whether it's the pitcher or the batter, right? Or the base runner or the fielder. Do you stress anything like that about having a routine, something they're doing to keep themselves in a consistent mindset now once they enter into that circle?
Yes. So I say, everybody's got to have a routine, and the routine is personalized. And so
right.
I asked the question, when does the routine start and when does it end? And so they start thinking about that. So yeah, we make it a point that we say, okay, we want you to write down a routine for when you're at bat. When does it start? Well, it starts in the dugout, starts when I get to the game, it starts the night before. Let me know what that is, write it down. And so they write down a routine, they turn it in, I look at it, I may make some suggestions and recommendations, but I want them to feel that it's theirs. But the beautiful thing about it is, once we both agree on it, then I observe that very closely, and you'll find that they go through a routine. They have a certain way. They look on deck to get the timing down of the pitcher, to get their focus, to do a lot to clear the mind and all that good stuff. And then they take a walk to the batter's box. So they have a routine during the season, but all of a sudden, playoffs come about, where an important game or the championship, state tournament, all of a sudden, that routine is either aborted or they rush it. So as a coach, I can visibly, tangibly see their pace. So I can address that and say, hey, relax, slow down, enjoy the moment, follow your routine. So that's one thing I'm huge on routines, because you will perform not to the level of play, but more to the level of your training.
Right.
And so, right. If you haven't trained that, we can't expect that to happen from our athletes. But the other thing that I think is important for me is, I call it peace, and it's performance execution after a critical error.
Okay.
And so if we don't practice mistake response, which we encourage, just don't repeat it.
Right.
Most people they will avoid mistakes. Well, not so much. Encourage it. So that means that they're working on the outside of their capacities or their boundaries, which we all have to see where their potential lies. So performing execution after critical error is important, and that involves breathing. I'm a big, big proponent of breathing and so forth. And then the last thing that we do that I think is kind of neat that keeps everybody together, I got this from attending a motivational workshop. Brendan Burchard, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's in the marketing. Really, he's a multimillionaire in 6 different entities, professions. And he said something that we applied to our team, and it was everybody likes to have a game hug, and that includes the coach. And so, when something isn't going well, we'd see guys hug people, and that would be one. The other thing would be if I were to say, I'm here, that means that everybody's got to respond in unison, I'm here, which indicates to me that they're present. And as we both know, the ability to be present and focused is critical. And again, that's an acquired skill that we don't talk about much.
Right.
And then the last thing that we did is anytime there's a great play, we go da-da-da, da-da-da, just like the ESPN. So we did that. As corny as that may sound, we all had some fun with it. And I think it was the common thread that kept the Bees players together. So those are a few things that come to my mind quickly.
I like that because it's keeping the camaraderie. It's having certain things built in. It's keeping the energy. It's keeping the mood light, but also it's keeping people engaged. And people don't see the true value. People a lot of times brush that off, and it's like, no. That's part of the glue. That's some of what's holding the team together and keeping the energy management and the dynamics there.
Yeah,
big.
I mean, you should never lose the energy game.
Yeah,
never lose the energy game. You need energy to perform well, and so that's something that everyone should be able to do. And so that's very observable. And if it's not happening, then somebody's got to confront that.
Yeah, I think that's dead on.
Take ownership.
And that's where a lot of people are just spending so much time on again. And we're not downplaying the physical side of the sport by any stretch. Like, in fact, most people need to work more on the physical side and the technique and the skills and the drills and everything. It's just all we're saying is don't neglect the mental side also. That's a piece of the puzzle. The energy management is huge. Practicing the way you play is huge. Keeping the camaraderie, keeping, being able to deal with mistakes that are going to happen. It's big.
I think so many, I think our big problems, and I would love to sit down and talk with you at some point soon, hopefully, about fear, because I think fear is a real stimulus that we try to avoid instead of using fear as fuel. But what I wanted to say was that I think oftentimes problems are caused by not being present, by being in the wrong time zone.
Right.
And we're not present. We're thinking about what happened in the past, or we're worried about what's going to happen, and we're not present. And players are usually now, and coaches are always looking into the future. So sometimes there's a disconnect. And so when we expect certain things of our players, it's rooted into the future. And so being aware of that, I think, is helpful in dealing with that individual athlete or performer or your team. Is that the element of clashing in time zones? Definitely.
That's a big part of it. We always say fear, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real, right? And our third principle, we have our 4 mindset principles. We have the teams say before and after any practice or get together. Number 3 is I have no fear of losing or making mistakes, because we find that is the big thing that holds us back. And it's when we have that prey mindset, right? We talk about the predator and prey mindset, and that prey mindset, eyes on the side, whereas the predators have their eyes on the front. The side is focusing on everything outside of our control. So looking good or bad in front of our friends or family, thinking about success or failure because it's not in our direct control. Thinking about the magnitude of the game, thinking about making it, you make an error in the field, now you're trying to make it up at the plate, or vice versa. That's not being in the right moment. So like you said, are we in the right time space, right? Are we in the past, in the future? Where are we mentally? And that's just important to acknowledge. You're right.
I loved it. And I've read your book and I couldn't put it down. And there's a lot of things that I got out of it, but based on our discussion now, you talked about how everything is important, but nothing is special.
Right.
And that to me is a huge concept that players and coaches have a difficult time with, I think. They make everything special. And so it's like a switch. To me, there is no switch. It's who you are. You embody excellence. You hunt excellence. And so that's what must happen. And, I think so. Sometimes that doesn't seem to go very well. And so I think it's important that we look at things as being important. And, the players have to look at it that way.
Yeah, and like you said, again, it begins in practice, and it's the consistency right across the board. My dad was always a huge baseball fan, so I learned a lot about baseball before I learned about any other sport. And I think about, he used to talk about Pete Rose, and remember hearing, Charlie Hustle, and that's one of my earliest sports memories. My dad telling me hustle, hustle when I was playing, right? And I think about him. Didn't he run over someone in the All-Star game? And then I remember he got some heat about it, and they said, why were you playing like this in an all-star game? And his interview, he said, I don't care if it's a, in season, out of season, you're playing to win. It's the same thing. It's just competition. And I said, yes, that's exactly right. And having that attitude and even if, and being willing to maybe get laughed at or made fun of, because right, he would walk and he would run down to first base. And I think he got a lot of heat over that. It's don't worry about looking cool. Don't worry about what people are going to say about you. You play and you play hard.
Oh, yeah, that's, I think that's the problem with some guys. I think they turn it on and off. And I would say managers, coaches as well. To me, you can't have that because players will see that, will feed into it. And, you just develop poor habits, and I don't think it's good. And for me, I think Conor McGregor said it. For me, precision trumps power, and timing trumps speed. Whether we're talking about fighting or whether we're talking about anything,
Right.
I can swing a bat really fast, but not at the expense of control.
Right.
So there's always that balance. And so to me, it's more about precision. It's about the timing, as I kind of alluded to. I could answer every hitting problem by saying, yeah, it probably starts with a timing issue, and be right. Because is it a bad swing or a bad read when you look foolish? I think it's a perceptual skill. It's a timing issue. We control how fast we can swing a bat. We can control or quantify the delivery time of a pitcher. What we can't do real well or is difficult is the time in between the ball in space. And so if you don't have good control and you don't understand some of these components, it's necessary to have that foundation of awareness to be able to deal and adapt and adjust to the complexities that we face.
Yeah, it's great. Just tremendous stuff. A lot of great information. I'm sure we could do this all night. I'm sure. But
Really good.
We'll keep them in small segments. I think that's good. We just hit on so much now, and I always tell people, make sure you take notes. Right? Success leaves clues. So if you're just listening to a lecture, most people don't realize they only remember 5% of the information. That's almost like you weren't even there. But when you write things down, I think the retention jumps to somewhere like 50 or 70% because it's more active learning. That's part of the learning pyramid. I needed to learn that as a school psychologist. So please take notes, and all these little things that you're saying there, Paul, they're gold nuggets of information. So just great. Awesome. Thank you for everything. Any other closing points that you wanted to make or something that maybe jumped in your head or I wanted to hit on this? And then we'll come back to it another time.
Well, I got so many things. I just think that, well, I'm going to end it with a quote, but one last thing I want to say is like, I think players today have a tendency to want validation, acknowledgement, and recognition. And for me, if they could only understand contribution and where they came from, and they're put in a place of being able to perform because of things that happened previously. And so the contribution is not only with your teammates and how you contribute to the well-being of the team, but also your contribution to the special people that put you in a special place.
Right.
And so contribution-oriented, contribution-focused versus recognition-focused, and so that to me is a biggie. And if you lick the lollipop of mediocrity, you will suck forever.
That's it. That's great. No, it's true. I think you're right, especially now. Like in a sense, the kids they have it easier, but they have it harder in a certain way because all social media, you're the star. You have a page, you're the star. So it becomes about recognition. It becomes about me. And you're right. We do need to get back to duty and responsibility and contribution. So that's huge, right? And if we think about how much we're going to give, the way the world tends to work, when you give a lot, you tend to get a lot back. So not that that's the reason why you should do it, just for selfish motives, but that's one of those ancillary benefits that tends to happen when you're a giver.
It's a natural occurrence. You get what you give.
Yeah. Yeah. But too many people, I think they want to get and not give. So we work on that. That's it. The biggest room in the world, as my dad always said, is the room for improvement. So we continue to grow. Yeah.
There's so many cool things we can talk about, and I'd love to continue with this. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really impressed with all of your work, Gene, too, and what your brother does as well. And am I correct in saying that you guys started with wrestling?
Started with wrestling. Yep.
And then you've expanded, and you've done. I've listened to your presentations at different venues of High School Coaches Association and college and a host of other things, and they're really, really good. And I appreciate all the work that you put into it. You've been kind enough to share with me your book, and as well as the action plans and all the detailed, I'm not sure what you call it, but all the things like self-knowledge, goal getting,
right?
I don't know what you're calling, but then there's like a ton of great information that, if applied, will see a difference. So I just want to commend you on the super work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Paul. I always said baseball is one of those real special sports. There's so many, like mindset is mindset. That's true. But baseball puts you in so many different unique situations that it really stands out from other sports in many ways. So I've always seen that. I've always respected baseball players. A lot of my examples I use for wrestling, baseball, basketball, soccer, tennis, they're baseball examples. So it's great stuff. National pastime. Paul Niggebrugge, thank you very much for all of your great contribution. Another awesome session of Meeting of the Minds. We will do this again. Clearly, we have a lot more to talk about. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.